Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with Jewish Insider. You can sign up for Jewish Insider's daily kickoff by visiting jewishinsider.com. We are honored to be joined today by Ambassador Nathan Sales, the U.S. State Department's Coordinator for Counterterrorism, Hans-Georg Engelke, the German State Secretary at the Federal Ministry of the Interior, and joining us in a few moments will be Right Honorable Sajid Javid MP, Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer from 2019 to 2020, and Home Secretary from 2018 to 2019. And moderating today's conversation on Hezbollah and Europe is Simone Rodin Benzaken, the Director of AJC Europe. After we hear from Simone and our esteemed guests, time permitting, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org, questions is plural, or use the Q&A feature in WebEx. Simone, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jillian. I would like to welcome our viewers around the world who are with us today. In 2013, after the terrorist attacks and burglars committed by Hezbollah, the EU decided to list the so-called military wing of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, leaving the so-called political wing free to operate everywhere. Since then, and for those who know AJC well, including, I believe, some of our European diplomats calling in today, AJC continued its advocacy with governments in Europe asking them to drop this artificial distinction and list Hezbollah as a terrorist organization in its entirety. Earlier this year, Germany, and followed by Lithuania, shocked the world and joined the United States, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and other states in banning Hezbollah entirely. Since the devastating explosion in Beirut at the beginning of August, we're also hearing more and more Lebanese voices asking to end Hezbollah's grip on Lebanon itself. This is also why AJC created the Transatlantic Friends of Israel, a group of nearly 250 legislators from both sides of the Atlantic who have called on the EU to list Hezbollah as a terrorist organization in its entirety. So I do hope that today's progress will provide some additional incentive to finally cross that line. I'm particularly delighted to be able to have this timely conversation with our distinguished panelists today. But let's start off right away. For our usual viewers, you will notice that this program will start off a little bit different than usual, apart from being on a different platform. The three panelists will all give a few introductory remarks before we start with the conversation. So if I could ask Minister Engelke to maybe start off the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I'll do my best. Thank you for having me. You said we shocked the world. I hope we didn't. We don't want to shock the world, but to start with a few remarks on the German approach, I'd say we want to live here in Germany in a peaceful society that clings to fundamental human rights, and we would allow anybody being completely neutral to live within these boundaries just as she or he wants to. The only thing is when we get cross is when somebody tries to exceed these boundaries and works against the principles of international law and against our basic human rights. Basic human rights such as freedom of speech, freedom of belief, freedom of assembly, etc., etc. I'm just starting with that because please understand that from the background of our history, we also have some more or less sharp swords, and one of them is the ability to ban organizations when they are contrary to the criminal laws, when they are directed against our constitutional order, or when they are directed against the idea of international understanding. This is a special legal opportunity that we have. We try not to use it. We use it cautiously. We use it completely without regard to beliefs, religion, attitudes, something like that. It's just if you are directed against the basic human rights that we have, then you would run into problems with these laws. So as I said, we always try to be very reluctant by using that. But in the case of Hezbollah, we used this instrumentarium 3 times since 2008. Hezbollah in Germany is no fixed organization, no assembly, no registered organization. We believe to have some 1,000 sympathizers being clandestinely organized in associations, but also not being organized at all, working clandestinely, as I said, together. Make heavy use of the internet and use Germany basically as a base, as a safe haven and a base for recruitment as well as collecting of funds. I said 3 times we made use of the law that I quoted. That was in 2008 for the first time when we banned the operations of Almanar, a TV station that was hosted in Germany. In 2014, we banned a fundraising organization, Waisenkinder Projekt, took it to the highest administrative and constitutional court. And then finally, in spring, as you said, we banned the organization as a whole. If I might come back, because I think from the legal point of view, this is maybe something that would interest you and the audience. We had activities of an association here collecting money for Hezbollah purposes. The discussion in Germany was Hezbollah, an organization that also has social work strokes, runs hospitals, etc. How could you tell whether the money collected here is being used for terrorist purposes or not? We said we don't mind. That was our argument. We don't mind any euro, any dollar, any whatever that's been raised in Germany and goes to Hezbollah, being a terrorist organization, serves a terrorist purpose. And if it is used for another than directly terrorist funding, it might be enable the organization to use the money that they get from here to put it here into maybe social purposes, but then have different money to use it for terrorist purposes. So we said at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Any penny that is being collected for a terrorist organization serves a terrorist purpose, and therefore we banned it. That has, of course, been questioned. We took it, as I said, to our highest courts, and they upheld our indictment. So, and on this basis, in 2020, in the spring, we banned any operation of Hezbollah in Germany. The result would be that you are not allowed to carry out any activities in Germany that supports Hezbollah. You are not allowed to use symbols. You are not allowed to assembly in the name of Hezbollah. And we think it was a due step towards the international ban of this organization. Maybe so far we have a question and answer part. I don't want to talk too long, but that's for a start. Thank you.
Apologies to our viewers. We're facing some technical difficulties. Simone's audio cut out, but Ambassador Sales, let me open it up to you for some opening remarks as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thanks to the AJC for hosting this event today, and thanks as well to my co-panelists from Germany and the UK for joining this very important conversation. We're here today to discuss Hezbollah's activities in Europe and what more our European allies can do to combat this threat. I'd like to start by commending our German and British friends for their leadership on this issue. They've taken a strong stand and a principled stand, and we hope that more countries follow their lead. I'll make 3 key points today. First, Hezbollah is a unitary organization that cannot be subdivided into a military wing and a so-called political wing. Second, led by countries like Germany and the UK, the world is increasingly recognizing this reality and designating or banning Hezbollah in its entirety. Third, more governments need to do the same, particularly in Europe, where Hezbollah's presence represents a significant threat. I'll have more to say about that issue in a moment. As a starting point, the United States rejects the false distinction that the EU and others have drawn between Hezbollah's terrorist activities and a purportedly political wing. Hezbollah is one organization. It is a terrorist organization, period. Hezbollah itself acknowledges as much. In October of 2012, a top Hezbollah commander was crystal clear about this. He said, and I'm quoting, "We don't have a military wing and a political wing. Every element of Hezbollah is in service of the resistance, and we have nothing but the resistance as a priority." The gaps resulting from this skewed approach are not merely symbolic. If a country only restricts Hezbollah's so-called military wing, that can limit its ability to freeze Hezbollah assets, shut down its front companies, eliminate its fundraising and recruiting, and prosecute its operatives. The gaping loophole becomes an exception that swallows the rule. As the State Secretary has already said, money is fungible, and any support to Hezbollah frees up resources to buy bombs and rockets. The United States has long recognized Hezbollah's true nature. We designated the group as a foreign terrorist organization in 1997. It was one of the first groups we ever so designated, and we've maintained that designation ever since. In fact, earlier today, the United States imposed additional sanctions on Hezbollah, with our Treasury Department designating 2 Hezbollah-linked companies, Arch Consulting and Myanmar Construction, along with Sultan Khalifa Assad, a Hezbollah Executive Council member who has ties to these businesses. These actions build on our September 8th sanctions against former Lebanese Minister Youssef Finyanous, who colluded with these companies to conceal their activities and support Hezbollah's self-enrichment. It's yet another example of how Hezbollah exploits Lebanon's economy to advance its own interests at the expense of the Lebanese people. Fortunately, the world is recognizing the truth about Hezbollah, and a growing number of countries are taking action, led by Germany and the UK. Those examples are especially significant because they lay down an important marker. The EU's Hezbollah sanctions are a floor, not a ceiling, and member states remain free to impose stricter limits at the national level. More recently, Lithuania banned Hezbollah, and Kosovo designated the group in its entirety. Serbia likewise has announced that it will designate Hezbollah. Closer to home, here in the Western Hemisphere, our Central and South American partners are taking the same path. In July of 2019, Argentina announced its designation of Hezbollah at a counterterrorism ministerial tied to the 25th anniversary of Hezbollah's deadly attack on the EMEA Jewish Community Center, which killed 85 people and wounded hundreds more. Paraguay shortly after followed suit. And in January of this year, Colombia and Honduras both announced that they were sanctioning Hezbollah. To put these developments in a broader perspective, 4 of the G7 members, Canada, Germany, the United States, and the United Kingdom, have now designated or banned Hezbollah in its entirety. That includes the 2 largest economies in Europe. In the Middle East, the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Arab League have both classified Hezbollah as a terrorist group. Clearly, there is a growing international momentum for action against this dangerous threat. But there's still more work to do. Some countries haven't sanctioned Hezbollah at all, while others persist in the fiction that its terrorist activities can somehow be cordoned off from the rest of the organization. We call on the governments that have yet to designate or ban Hezbollah in its entirety to do so. Action by the European Union and its member states is particularly critical. Hezbollah has long been active in Europe on a variety of fronts, including terrorist plotting, military and dual-use procurement, and a range of illicit schemes. Let me recount briefly some recent history. In 2012, Hezbollah conducted an attack in Bulgaria that killed 6 people. The perpetrators are currently being tried by the Bulgarian government in absentia. Hezbollah has also planned 2 separate plots in Cyprus, disrupted in 2012 and 15 respectively. The first involved collecting information about Israeli tourists. The second involved stockpiling more than 8 tons of ammonium nitrate, which of course can be used to create powerful bombs. Hezbollah operatives were convicted in Cypriot courts for planning both plots. Additionally, according to press reporting, in 2015, authorities in the United Kingdom arrested a Hezbollah operative, who was a dual British-Lebanese citizen, who had amassed over 12,000 first aid cold packs in a London auto garage. The cold packs contained over 3 metric tons of ammonium nitrate. Hezbollah members and supporters are also involved in a wide range of large-scale criminal schemes in Europe. For example, in 2016, authorities in France, Germany, Italy, and Belgium, working with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, arrested Hezbollah affiliate Mohammed Noureddin and more than 20 others who were running an extensive money laundering network. The group laundered more than $1 million a week using vehicles, watches, and charcoal, and funneled a portion of the proceeds back to Hezbollah. In November of 2018, a French court sentenced Noureddin to 7 years in prison for his role in this criminal conspiracy. Now, unfortunately, this history is an ancient history. Hezbollah remains active in Europe right now. As the EU and European countries weigh further steps against Hezbollah, it's important that they and their citizens have the full picture of the group's terrorist activities on European soil. So today, the US government is unveiling new information about Hezbollah's presence in Europe. Since 2012, Hezbollah has established caches of ammonium nitrate throughout Europe by transporting first aid kits whose cold packs contain the substance. Today, I can reveal that such caches have been moved through Belgium to France, Greece, Italy, Spain, and Switzerland. I can also reveal that significant ammonium nitrate caches have been discovered or destroyed in France, Greece, and Italy. We have reason to believe that this activity is still underway. As of 2018, ammonium nitrate caches were still suspected throughout Europe, possibly in Greece, Italy, and Spain. The question then becomes, why would Hezbollah stockpile ammonium nitrate on European soil? The answer is clear. Hezbollah put these weapons in place so it could conduct major terrorist attacks whenever it, masters in Tehran, deemed necessary. It's not what you'd expect from a political organization, but it's exactly what you'd expect from a terrorist group. The horrific explosion last month at Beirut's port was a vivid reminder of how dangerous ammonium nitrate can be. The fact that Hezbollah has stockpiled the same substance across Europe shows why more European countries need to act now. The bottom line is that the EU's approach from 2013 simply hasn't worked. The limited designation of Hezbollah's so-called military wing hasn't dissuaded the group from preparing for terrorist attacks across the continent. Hezbollah continues to see Europe as a vital platform for its operational, logistical, and fundraising activities. And it will continue to do so until Europe takes decisive action, as the UK and Germany have both done. The United States encourages more of our European allies to follow their lead and designate or ban Hezbollah in its entirety. That sort of strong action is what's needed to demonstrate to Hezbollah that this kind of behavior is unacceptable and that it cannot prepare for terror with impunity on European soil. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sales. I will get back to some of the issues that you revealed and today, but I want to make sure that I welcome Minister Sajid Javid. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I will actually right away give you the floor because our other speakers have already spoken. Sajid Javid, the floor is yours. If you can just maybe give a few opening remarks on why you and the United Kingdom decided to list Hezbollah in its entirety as a terrorist organization. You will have to unmute your... I believe you will have to press a button, I believe. If that doesn't work out, we'll try and find the technical solution. And in the meantime, maybe I'll start with the conversation with our two speakers. Actually, so Ambassador Sales, if I can start out with you, I want to make sure that everybody here watching us today realizes that, but you just announced some breaking news here. on our program, and so thank you for that. But could I ask you to maybe give a little bit of details on what kind of information you have found, and whether you have already shared them with your different government contacts in Europe?
Well, Simone, thanks for the question. Yes, we are in regular and close contact with our European partners. What I've announced today about Hezbollah weapons caches throughout Europe over the past number of years, that will not come as a surprise to our friends in European governments. We think it's also important for members of the public to have access to this information so that they can make better judgments about the threat posed to them and their loved ones and their countries by this dangerous terrorist organization.
Thank you very much. Minister Javid, do you know if can I ask you to see if that works now? If you can now hear.
Are you able to hear me now?
Absolutely perfectly. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for
okay. My apologies for the technical problems earlier. So very sorry for that. And of course, a real pleasure to be on with you today. And thank you very much for inviting me. So let me turn straight away to the question you asked earlier about how we've seen this in the UK, and certainly how I saw this when I served as Home Secretary. And I just start by saying, look, Hezbollah, that we all know that ever since its existence has made any objective test that exists for a terrorist organization. It murders and maims people across the world in order to meet its try to meet its political objectives. And you'll know that here in the UK that starting, going back many years, first in 2001, and then I think followed up in 2008 as well, by a bit of tightening, the UK banned what it referred to as Hezbollah's military wing, alongside many other countries, including the EU, and I think some 20 or so countries around that time started doing something similar. But we have known, I think to me it's been obvious all along, long before I was actually Home Secretary, that there is no distinction between the sort of military wing of Hezbollah and its political wing. And this really, from day one, was, I think, you could describe it as a bit like a comfortable, elegant lie that existed, certainly in the UK political system. And it existed just so that that some people that wanted to continue to work with Hezbollah, other parts of Lebanon and stuff, they wanted a sort of legal way to do that, and they created this fallacy. And to me, it was apparent for a long time, long before I became the Home Secretary, as it was to many of my colleagues in Parliament. But every time in the British Parliament, when we tried to have some action taken on this, it always come up against the same problems, the same claims that would be made. That the Foreign Office would say, look, that Hezbollah is integrated into the Lebanese political system, and we just have to accept it the way it is. It's too complex to extricate it. Our international development people would say in DFID, a Department for International Development, that they're involved in many humanitarian programs, which is obviously a good thing that they are in Lebanon, but that Hezbollah is involved and somewhere we have to communicate with them. Some people would argue that Hezbollah is helping the fight against Daesh. I mean, all these sort of what I thought were nonsense arguments. And as Home Secretary, I sort of basically went through them one by one, demolished them one by one, and got to a point eventually where I got my colleagues to accept, including the Foreign Office, the International Development Department, and other parts of the British system, that if Hezbollah itself thinks there is no distinction between the political and military, we certainly should not think that. They're probably laughing at us in trying to do this sort of dance. And we need to end this charade. And thankfully, we were able to do that in February of 2019.
Start off with a question regarding what you just described. From your perspective, what was it that allowed you to actually get sufficient consensus and allow you to take that step? Was it one particular argument? Was it specific information that you detained? What was it that actually managed to convince everybody else that you really needed to get there?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So maybe best answered if I just sort of set out the 2 or 3 sort of arguments against making it one organization and banning it in its entirety. I mean, the first main argument that was against it to the Home Office was that from the Foreign Office, saying, look, Lebanon is a state is already destabilized, a fragile state, and we need to keep working with it. And because Hezbollah takes part in elections and things and has ministers, we can't sort of distinguish between the two. And that was, it was always a nonsense argument. I think it was just politically convenient for some of our diplomats and others to operate in that way. And I worked very closely with the Foreign Secretary at the time, Jeremy Hunt, who, once he looked into it in detail, worked with me on it, was very understanding of this and very supportive. And we were able to say to the diplomats that you should be able to operate directly with the legitimate Lebanese government. You don't need to deal with any political aspect of Hezbollah, and we would give you a time. And what we agreed was that you would get a 3-month time frame to do that before we make the announcement. So we had made the decision 2 or 3 months before February 2019 in order to try and give time for the Foreign Office to come up with an action plan, which they did. And obviously, since we've made the decision, those fears of the Foreign Office have been proven comprehensively wrong. We have no problem, no issues dealing with the Lebanese government today, as many said we would. The second argument was around humanitarian help. We're very proud of the work that we do across the world in terms of international development. Of course, Lebanon is one of those countries, even then, and even more so now, I guess, that needed international support in terms of humanitarian work. And we do work there through our DFID department. But again, we set that department, we gave them 3 months. I'd said to say, look, we're going to go ahead and do this. You've got 3 months to extricate yourself from any project that you believe you cannot be involved in because of Hezbollah. And once pushed to it, they did it. And then the third argument was around Daesh, saying, look, Hezbollah it helps fight Islamic State, which of course was a nonsense. Our enemy's enemy is not our friend, and they are both terrorist groups, and that was something that I think that was quickly agreed once I had got my colleagues to focus on it. And there's one final point I'd mentioned. I remember it came up at the time, and that was how France would react. And that was raised by the Foreign Office as well. And we were told, obviously, we knew that everyone knows the historic links between Lebanon and France. And I remember specifically being told that we shouldn't do this because it might upset the president of France. And if he gets really upset, it might have an impact on our Brexit negotiations. So, sadly, in Britain today, everything somehow is being linked to Brexit. And I just thought, again, it was a completely nonsense argument. And as long as we work closely with our French allies and we explain to them every step of the way what we're doing, what we're thinking about, they surely would understand. And that was proven actually to be the case. We told the Elysee in advance, many weeks in advance, and they kept it confidential. And we worked with them very closely. But there were people in the Foreign Office that were saying, you must not do this at this time. Can we please wait until Brexit is over? And I refused to do that. And again, the approach we took was proven.
Bravo, first for your commitment and your courage in that. Thank you so much. Ambassador Held, in your conversations with European diplomats, I imagine you encounter the same kind of arguments Minister Javid just described. I sit here in Paris, I interact with many French diplomats on a daily basis, specifically on that issue. And the question, for example, of the destabilization or the potential destabilization of Lebanon, because Hezbollah is also part of the political process, is one that obviously comes up. Can you describe maybe some of those conversations and what your counter arguments are in that effect?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I'd actually take a step back and answer a preliminary question, which is why is it that some countries or diplomats in Europe that oppose the designation of the group in its entirety? What's driving that? And an additional reason is skepticism that Hezbollah really represents a threat to Europe. I've had the question posed to me, do you really think Hezbollah is a threat? And they will, the folks who pose that question will point to the fact that, you know, the Hezbollah attack on the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut happened more than 30 years ago. Ancient history, the assumption seems to be. Of course, that's not the case. Of course, Hezbollah represents a clear and present danger to the United States today. It represents a clear and present danger to Europe today. It doesn't have those tons of ammonium nitrate across Europe because they plan to engage in large-scale industrial farming. It's clearly weapons. It's clearly there to enable terrorist attacks if and when a decision is made to do so. Another point I would make to echo, and I want to strongly associate the United States with the former Home Secretary's views on this question. Another point I would make is that you don't have to choose between stabilizing Lebanon on the one hand and fighting Hezbollah on the other. These two goals are mutually reinforcing, and they animate U.S. policy towards Lebanon. The fact is, Hezbollah is not a force for stability in Lebanon. To the contrary, Hezbollah is a force for instability in Lebanon. It has created a culture of rampant corruption and impunity. It has enriched itself at the expense of the Lebanese people. It has ensconced itself in the economy and in the political system. It is a cancer that needs to be rooted out, not accommodated. And the United States approach does exactly that. We engage with the legitimate organs of the Lebanese state, including the security services. We have invested enormous sums of money in helping to stabilize Lebanon, while at the same time applying maximum pressure to Hezbollah. Since 2006, we have invested over $2 billion in Lebanon's security services. We've also invested more than $1 billion in economic assistance. So the record is clear. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can fight Hezbollah while at the same time helping Lebanon and its people move towards a brighter future.
Yeah.
I see some agreement there. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sales. Minister Engelke, if I can ask you specifically about Germany. After the Hezbollah ban in Germany, the police conducted raids, notably all over Germany, but notably also in southern Germany, where it seems a warehouse was found, and Ambassador Sales has already referred to it. Can you tell us a little bit more about those discoveries, the dangerosity of them, and to what extent German authorities were surprised by what they found?
Yeah, well, we immediately after our ban, we raided a couple of associations, buildings, and housings of private persons, because we thought this would be part of the network and the systems. And during these raids, we didn't find any of these explosives that you mentioned. We found them earlier, but I'll come back to that later. But during these activities, immediately after the ban, what we discovered was mostly propaganda materials, like pictures, like flags, like handouts, papers, and stuff like that. We, on a very limited base, we also found weapons, but there was no only light weapons, to put it like that. But what you mentioned was the finding of ammonium nitrate. is that the ammonium nitrate? Yeah, the correct expression, in substantial amounts in southern Germany. That's true, but that was before the raids. And but it adds to the picture that Ambassador Sales mentioned, and Javid said that we saw a lot of activities in assembling explosive materials. We think it was made for terrorist purposes and collected for being that. The rest was an intelligence operation, so I'm a bit limited, if you forgive me on being a bit restricted on that. But it was an amount that really worried us, and no, the announcement of Ambassador Sales didn't really come as a surprise to us.
Thank you very much, Minister Engelke. Ambassador Sales, there are two main themes here. One is Hezbollah's activities and the risk they pose to Europe and Europe's security. Also, by the way, another issue that we haven't mentioned, Europe's capacity to effectively combat anti-Semitism, because Hezbollah obviously is also a intrinsically anti-Semitic organization. But there is also the other about Hezbollah's role in Lebanon and in the region. Now, regarding the latter, can you imagine a Lebanon that recovers from a dire financial, economic, political, and humanitarian situation as long as Hezbollah is involved?
You know, Simone, I have an active imagination, but I think even that would strain my ability to conjure. Hezbollah is a force for violence and corruption and instability. As long as Hezbollah continues to maintain its tentacles throughout the various different facets of the Lebanese economy and its society and its political system, Lebanon is not going to develop into the country that the Lebanese people deserve and that the international community wants it to be. And now is the time. I think Hezbollah is on the ropes in Lebanon and around the world. The sanctions that the United States and other countries have placed on Hezbollah and its patrons have dried up the resources that were previously available to it. The people of Lebanon today, in the wake of the Beirut port explosion, have called for a fresh start. Now is not the time to accommodate Hezbollah. Now is the time to finish the good work that many of our countries have done by applying pressure to it, marginalizing it, and isolating it for the betterment of the world, but also of the Lebanese people.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just to follow up a little bit on that. So in other words, you think that President Macron's current efforts cannot succeed without addressing the issue of Hezbollah? And to what extent do you have a cooperation and a conversation with the French government, who obviously is very invested in making sure that Lebanon is can have sort of a rebirth, specifically on the issue of Hezbollah?
Well, that's a great question, and I think there's areas of agreement and areas of disagreement. I think broadly, the United States and France share the same objective, and that is a Lebanon that makes it through the financial crisis and the explosion crisis is able to rebuild itself and be a prosperous, functioning state. I think we have a disagreement on tactics. I think a pretty significant disagreement on tactics. We do not think that the path towards self-sufficiency, independence, and prosperity for Lebanon goes through Hezbollah. We do not think that it is helpful to engage Hezbollah as though it were a legitimate political actor, because it's not. It's a terrorist organization that exploits the Lebanese people for its own benefit.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think Minister Javid, actually, if I can ask you maybe to follow up on that, and also you spoke to us a little bit about some of the things that were said to you by the Foreign Office, specifically about the UK's capacity to continue to have a positive relationship with Lebanon, have an influence in Lebanon. Can you tell us a little bit sort of the aftermath of the ban on Hezbollah, and to what extent has it altered at all or not your relationship with Lebanon? And also, was there any reaction of Lebanese civil society to the British ban of Hezbollah?
So first of all, just to follow off with what the ambassador just said, which I very much agree with, in that, you know, I think it's really important to keep at the top of our minds that Hezbollah is not a organization that exists to help Lebanon. It is the cause, or part of the cause, of Lebanon's problems. Right? It is causing the problems, and anyone who is interested, like I think we all are in this call, is seeing a prosperous, stable Lebanon. You can see Hezbollah cannot play any role in that, and so the ambassador is right to say that you don't have to choose to have Hezbollah if you want to help Lebanon. In fact, as long as Hezbollah is there, you really won't be able to stabilize and see the kind of Lebanon everyone would want to see, not least of most, obviously, the Lebanese people themselves. And it's worth reminding that Hezbollah was created as an instrument of the Iranian state, as a foreign influence of the Iranian state, and that hasn't changed. It's there to carry out the wishes of a foreign hostile state, and that's their only objective. It's not about the Lebanese people. And in terms of your question, you know, the aftermath, as it were, of the decision, I think, in short, it was nothing like anyone had said it would be. All the doomsayers about the relationship with Lebanon is as strong as ever. The international development programs that we had to recalibrate some of them, stop one or two of them, but invest in others. That work continues. And I already mentioned our relationship, whether it's with the French and others, and I think and obviously we saw the decision by Germany, which we hugely welcomed afterwards as well. I think it's helped us to make this argument with our European friends in particular, but I would also like to see the Australians, our friends in New Zealand and others follow through as well. But also, you know, I was told that you're going to get judicial review of this decision. You'll be in the courts for years, and there was no action in the courts at all, because I think our decision was very clear. And as the minister was saying, that in the case of Germany, rightly, when they were making this decision, they think about Germany's own national interest and national security interest, and that's what was also top of my mind. Of course, we want to support our allies across the world, help stabilize the Middle East, but it starts really with your own national interest. And whilst there's a number of things I can't talk about public, but I can point to some public information that has since come out about Hezbollah and its activities in the UK. Just this week, there was a report, quite a detailed report in some of the papers, of Hezbollah's links with the new IRA, a dissident terrorist organization in Northern Ireland. Links to weapons smuggling, drug smuggling, and that's quite a recent, detailed story. And also, I just wanted to touch on your point you made about anti-Semitism, because we know, sadly, that Hezbollah is, as well as being dedicated to the destruction of the state of Israel, it has an active propaganda force that spreads anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories across the world. And we also know, as we mentioned in the course of this, that they have fake news training camps in Lebanon, where they're inviting people from from across the world, from Saudi Arabia, from Iraq, from Pakistan, and places, to come and learn how to spread fake news and spread anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories across the world. And that is no good for anyone, and certainly not in our national interest as well, to allow some of that to happen. And one final point, if I just want to make clear that when I'm talking about the Foreign Office here in the UK, I'm talking about the Foreign Office as an institution that was very opposed to the decision that I made as Home Secretary. But I have to say that the Foreign Secretary at the time, Jeremy Hunt, was nothing but very, very supportive.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for making that specific distinction. Minister Engelke, now that Germany has taken this bold step and that Lithuania has just followed your example. Could you share with us, particularly as Germany currently holds the EU presidency, what the current status is in terms of the conversations that you have on the EU about listing Hezbollah as a terrorist organization in its entirety? And where do you see the resistance coming from?
Yeah, gladly do so, but forgive me, I'm also representing the acting head of the European presidency, so I'm probably the most boring participant in the panel today, being restricted to saying something about our internal deliberations. Our position, the German position, would be very clear. We said that Hezbollah as a whole is directed against the very thought of international peaceful coexistence, and we don't care whether it utters itself as a political, social, or terrorist entity. That is our position. Therefore, now I'm speaking as the guy from the Interior Ministry, as Minister Javid made the distinction between those two. Let me point out that there might be some different views also in any other state. From the Ministry of Interior's point of view, we'd love to see Hezbollah being banned as a terrorist organization as a whole. And we surely advocated within our national discussion, as well as in terms of our presidency of the European Union. We have some resistance, though, by some governments who feel that as long as Hezbollah is also part of the institutions of Lebanon, it has to be dealt with in a different way, and that means not listing them. And you know that positions in countries like France and Italy are different to this approach that I just mentioned. We are advocating, but I'm not very optimistic that we get this case solved during the times of our presidency, I have to say, and I admit, because the discussion is going on, and I have to say, yes, these are aspects that we all have to deal with. It is, if I may say that to Ambassador Sales, it's of course you don't have to be a genius to come to that. We are in a multilateral environment and have to come along with that. So that probably takes longer in other states or corporations, but I'm thinking that there is some movement in the right direction, but nothing more I can say at this point. Sorry for being boring.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Minister Engelke. Actually, Ambassador Sales, because Minister Engelke just referred to you. There is the elephant in the room, and that is France, and Minister Engelke again just mentioned it. If France were to change its position, specifically on Hezbollah, and at this stage, in the recent public declarations of Emmanuel Macron, that doesn't seem to be the case. But if France was to change its position specifically on Hezbollah, what would you expect would be the outcome of that? Would it be automatically change the situation on the EU level?
Well, I think this operates at multiple levels. There's progress at the EU, but there's also progress among individual member states. And those two tracks can and should proceed in parallel. Of course, we would love to see our French allies join the club that includes Germany and the UK. And we will continue to make the case to our French friends that Hezbollah, one, is a threat to the world, two, is a force for instability in Lebanon, and three, is a unitary organization, terrorist to the core. But at the same time, we're also continuing to work with individual EU member states to make the case for them, using their national authorities, using their domestic authorities, to take decisive action against Hezbollah. The UK and Germany have done that already, and as I said in my remarks, that establishes a really groundbreaking groundbreaking precedent, which is to say that individual EU member states, which the UK was at the time, are not limited by the EU's designation limits. They can go beyond it, as the UK did, as Germany did, as Lithuania has. And so as we continue to try and see action at the EU level in Brussels, we're going to continue to make the case among individual member states that they have the ability to take decisive action, and that's exactly what they should do.
Thank you. We're running relatively quickly out of time, but I have a couple of more questions. Minister Javid, from your perspective, what can the United Kingdom do now that it has left the European Union, which I personally regret, to work with allies in countering Hezbollah in Europe and to make sure that Lebanon actually will be a free and sovereign nation?
Well, first of all, I'd say that, as the ambassador said, that it'd be great if the EU as an organization was to get rid of this artificial distinction, but it's an important point that individual states can still play a role, as we did, as Germany has as well. In terms of what we can do, it's worth also, I think, just reflecting on our own experience and maybe even for France about how countries like France might get to a different decision eventually. One thing that really helped in the UK was the parliamentarians. Parliamentarians that weren't in the government, but saw this as a very important issue. They've been sort of educated on it. Some of them had traveled to the Middle East and seen some of the stability and how it's caused for themselves. And that made a big difference, having parliamentarians that were constantly calling for this. And where you have in a political system like the UK, the Foreign Office has a sort of groupthink view, the other departments, over years, they've sort of built a position and they find it very hard to shift from that. When you get parliamentarians that are constantly pushing for change, it can help. So when I announced this decision in Parliament, by the popularity of it, you'd think it would have happened sooner. But at least in Parliament, it was welcome, apart from, I have to say, unfortunately, by the then leadership of the Labour Party, where they did not support the decision. In fact, for the first time in the history of the UK, previously, when any government had prescribed a terrorist organization, there was a convention that all the major parties unite behind that and support it in the national security interest. And this was the first time that the major opposition party, the Labour Party, decided not to support us in banning Hezbollah. And we know why, because obviously the then leader, Jeremy Corbyn, had his own relationship with terrorists across the world. But we've moved on from that. But I just want to highlight this point about parliamentarians. And the last point I'd want to make, you said running out of time, but just very quickly, that banning an organization isn't the end of it. It's part of what I called at the time like a toolkit of combating terrorism. And it's important that once you ban it, there are other things that might happen a bit more easily because you've banned it. Cracking down on its publicity, especially online, working with law enforcement organizations, curtailing financing, fundraising for these organizations. When I became Chancellor of the Exchequer after Home Secretary, there's an annual prescription order we have for freezing terrorist assets. And I quickly noted that the Treasury was out of kilter with the decision I'd made as Home Secretary, because they were still treating Hezbollah in terms of terrorist financing orders as two separate organizations, the military and the political. And I changed that within 48 hours of knowing about it. I changed it as Chancellor, but it was helped by their very decision made as Home Secretary. Also, I think governments can have for more transparency about the data they find out about terrorist organizations. And then lastly, I think it helps you to move on to other terrorist groups, other organizations. So, for example, I've noted that the US has made a decision to ban IRGC. I think that is something the UK should be looking at as well. But once you sort of get the ball rolling on this, you can make sure that you're focusing on all terrorist organizations.
Thank you so much for this, my dearest panelist. Actually, you just made reference to parliamentarians, and I mentioned earlier on, and I'll finish with that as well. AJC has created an initiative called the Transatlantic Friends of Israel, who have signed a declaration. There are now nearly 250, asking the European Union to list Hezbollah as a terrorist organization from across Europe, and also from the United States. So yes, you're absolutely right. I think it is absolutely key that parliamentarians across Europe play that role. So for all those parliamentarians listening in today, I would urge you to join the Transatlantic Friends of Israel initiative. It was my honor to be hosting today's session. I would like to thank the panelists who have taken the time in what I know are crazy busy schedules. So to sit down with AJC to discuss this key issue with us at a particularly timely moment for Europe, but also for Lebanon and the rest of the region. I hope that all of you have watched this, have found this informative, and found the arguments in favor of a total ban of Hezbollah in the European Union. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to the panelists. Jillian.
Thank you, Simone. And again, thank you to our distinguished guests and our audience for joining us today. To take action with AJC and to urge the EU to designate all of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, please visit ajc.org/stophezbollah. Thank you and goodbye.